Welcome to Your Story Doesn't End Here, the mental health podcast for military and veterans. I'm your host, Rachel, and my mission with this podcast is to be a voice for those who don't have a voice, bring awareness to mental health issues, and provide value and solutions to help make life more abundant. Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming back for another episode. Today's guest is Jacquelin, but most people call her Jackie. She is an editor, a writer, and a writing coach. She loves helping people and wants to be a safe space for people who need help with their story or stories. She works with book writers, entrepreneurs, and content creators. She was diagnosed at the age of 4 with systemic lupus. And because of that, she has a lot of disabilities. One of those disabilities is dyslexia, which, as you have noticed by what she does, she's learned to deal with that. With that, she also wants to be able to give back what she was given when learning to read and write: encouragement, acknowledgement, patience, and integrity. Lastly, she's also the daughter of a retired Army major and Vietnam veteran. Her dad passed in 2017 from Agent Orange related disease. He had been in the military for 22 years, her mom going with him as a military wife for the same amount of time. Jacquelin, thank you so much for being on the show today.
You are so welcome. I'm so honored to be on here.
So I would love to first just get into a little bit about what your experience was like being the daughter of someone in the military. I know you and I, prior to recording, have talked a little bit about this. And I think that it's so important for the listeners to understand, because I know a lot of the people that I served with, and probably a lot of people that listen in on this podcast too, have kids in the military. And I can't imagine it's easy for a child to articulate exactly what it feels like. And so to hear from someone who's kind of been through the experience, maybe a little more on the extreme side from, someone who served in Vietnam, but nonetheless, still someone who I'm sure dealt with many different mental health related illnesses. And obviously he passed from Agent Orange related illness. So I think that it's important to have this conversation so that people understand what it's really like for the children. And then maybe in turn, so that parents can have maybe a better understanding and the support system around the people that don't have children in the military can also have that understanding, just to make the military a better place. I think this is a very important topic of discussion. So I'm going to stop rambling and I'm going to let you get into a little bit about what life was like for you, and we will go from there.
All right. So my parents are actually older parents because I'm adopted. I was adopted when I was 5. They're my maternal grandparents. So my birth mother, she is the one that really was the military child. Like, she was the one to move around and everything. But for me, I saw the aftermath of everything because I grew up right after my dad retired. He was in the military for 22 years. He retired just a few years before I was born. And then they got custody of me. And then they adopted me. But for me, I had to watch my dad go through the PTSD because he was ground forces. He wasn't, Air Force. He wasn't Navy or anything like that. He was he was Army. He was on the ground with the Viet Cong, with, all of the stuff that they did. And they were horrible. And even now, today, both my mom and I don't know the whole story. He kept a lot of it and took it to his grave. But we do know, like, he had PTSD. So I grew up not able to do certain things or having to do things a certain way so it didn't trigger him. Like, for example, when we went out to eat, we had to be in a specific like seating arrangement so his back was not to the door or to a window. We had to be very careful of what we watched on TV. So, because any type of gunfire or bombs would, trigger him as well. So I was not, which was hard for my parents because I was also homeschooled. So, watching like war documentaries was kind of, I mean, he would walk out, and let us watch it ourselves. But like if we were watching something and all of a sudden gunfire happened or a bombing happened or whatever in a movie or a TV show, which my mom and we love criminal crime shows and stuff. And so you'll always have like gunfire in those. It could trigger him. And I remember a few times growing up where I would be awakened to him screaming from like a nightmare or or a flashback or something. And I would go up to their room, knock on the door, and my mom would peek out and says, "It's okay, go back to sleep." And so I would. But those are the times that I remember. Those were the things that I remember. I also remember a lot of the physical stuff that happened with my dad because of the war. Because he was in on the ground, in the midst of war and stuff. He has a lot of shrapnel, or he had a lot of shrapnel. He got hit by shrapnel in his chest. That I do know about. He had to do surgery on himself at that time. And even to the day he passed away, he still had shrapnel in his chest. And what people don't know, and I don't know, military, they might know about this, I'm not sure, but shrapnel will come to the surface of the skin. And so I remember seeing, like, if he had his shirt off, I remember seeing the shrapnel, the scar and stuff. And he would always pick at the shrapnel that was coming to the surface. And so I remember that. I remember, like I had to help him a lot. He had back issues. He also had ankle issues because he got into what they called the punji sticks, which were just these sharp sticks that the Viet Cong would leave in the underbrush, and they would put poison on him. And so, and they would go into their ankles. And I remember, he had terrible time with his ankles. He had his back was disintegrating. And so even though at the time he was like in his 50s, 60s and stuff, he acted kind of like he was in his 80s, so it was like I grew up with having to help him with stuff. If he heard, like, he loved working. That's the thing. He loved working with his hands. And so he built a lot of stuff. He built 2 houses, one of which I lived in for 13 years. And he was like very hands-on, he wanted to learn everything. And so I remember certain times when he would be like building stuff, he would just like all he would have to do is like turn a certain way and his back was out. And I learned really quickly, along with my mom, certain ways to help him to get him back up on his feet again. And this was when I was like 8 years old, 4 to like 8 years old is when I learned So yeah, that was interesting. It was an interesting life.
So was his PTSD diagnosed prior to you being adopted, or was that something that was diagnosed after that you know of? Because I know you were really young at the time. And do you know if he ever got any ongoing support outside of family for his mental illness?
Yeah, I actually don't know if it was ever diagnosed. I know that my mom specifically talked about it, but I don't know if he was actually like um diagnosed doctor wise with it. That's the one thing about the Vietnam vets you don't understand is that the veterans, they don't have a lot of support. That's the thing. I mean, veterans today from like Afghanistan and all these other places, they have a lot of support, but when it comes to Vietnam vets, they don't. Um, and it takes a lot to get help for them. And so I don't know if he was actually diagnosed or if it was just, stated from family wise, but he did have a lot of support family wise. That is one thing. But he never, not that I know of, went to a therapist or went to a psychiatrist or anything like that.
So I want to talk about how being around a veteran with mental and physical disabilities affected you as a child. Um, because I think that's really important for people to know. And obviously, you had to make a lot of lifestyle adjustments that most 4 to 8 year olds, most kids don't have to do that. But I think a lot of kids of veterans do. And even till today, you see a lot of military getting out with mental and physical disabilities. I'm 90% disabled, according to the VA. A lot of that is from mental illness that was diagnosed when I was in the military. And I have my ways of coping and dealing with things, and I'm learning so much every single day. But there are people that don't and have a really hard time with getting help, and finding the right help. I think that's really important too. And sometimes, I have friends that, for lack of a better term, cannot be helped because they go to all these specialists and no one can help them, and just kind of stuck dealing with these things. And it's really sad, but that when one person's dealing with something, whether it be physical or mental, their circle around them has to adjust and deal with it too, not only for support, but sometimes they have to. And so I think it's important to talk about how that affected you as a child. And um, yeah, I think I just kind of want to hear your perspective on that.
Sure. Um, it was, looking back, it was interesting because now that I'm, married, and I've had a few years outside the family, not, outside the home and everything because I lived at home for before I was married. Um, it does put a huge perspective on things because I had to change how I thought about certain things, like, oh, I can watch, war movies. I can watch, war documentaries and stuff. And actually I'm a huge binge watcher of that type of stuff. Not war movies. That's more my husband's thing, but stuff like that. Um, stuff like that. And also having to remind myself that I don't have to be careful of what I say, what I do, because doesn't trigger other people like it would my dad, And so, and it's crazy because like certain things I would do, like a scream, like, as children scream, but for me, if I did that, it could trigger him, because of all the screaming that had happened in the war and everything. And yeah, it's interesting. It's very interesting. It's hard, because especially with my dad, he was very, very strong, or he tried to be. He put up this front that he was strong, that nothing could hurt him, nothing. And so when stuff like this happened, it was mostly like he would try to hold it all in until he was not around me, and then let it all out, like, privately. And that actually kind of taught me to do the same. And so I have that problem with showing emotions and stuff to other people, because my dad, I was a daddy's girl. And so I looked up to him. And so when he would hold everything in, I thought I had to too. I felt like I couldn't talk about things because, my dad didn't talk about anything. He didn't talk about his time in war, barely. If we asked about it, he might have just said a few little things here and there, but that was it. And so when something happens to me, I don't feel like I can talk about it. And I've had to really work on myself about, it's okay to talk about these things. But I think it also comes from how I was raised. I was raised Christian. And so with Christianity, you don't talk about these things either. You don't talk about your pain, your and stuff. And my dad was very Christian as well. So he also had that mentality that, he's a man, he has to be strong, he has to, so I think for me, the one thing that I really learned is that no matter what, or what I have, learned over time about this, and have noticed things, is that no matter what, it doesn't matter the gender, it does not matter the religion, if you have problems, you talk about it, I think it also depends on stuff like how they were treated when they came over. My dad was not treated well when he came back from the war. It was a different type of war. It was not a supported war, stuff like that. And so he just felt like he wasn't supported at all. And that's the one thing that I feel that needs to, be worked on, is the support and everything. So yeah, that's pretty much what I've learned, and what I have, what I was raised with, and what I saw throughout my childhood and everything.
And I think that's a really important point to bring up, and really helpful to the listeners who maybe are dealing with service connected mental illness or physical illness and have kids. And I think that as a parent, like, at least for me, I don't want to put my own things on my daughter. And so feeling like, hey, should I keep this in or should I let it out and let her know? You bring up a good point about like the open communication and how important it is to talk about these things, and that it's not necessarily putting it on a child, but it's letting them know like, hey, it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to have things that we're dealing with. And as long as we're communicating in a healthy way, which not a lot of people know how to do, I think that's where therapy and education can really come into play, but not keeping it all in, because I think that from what you said, that that can cause more either damage or confusion, or a lot of unpacking later in life, long term. And so um thank you for bringing that up. But this does segue us really well into the next topic that I wanted to talk about, which you had mentioned that you have lupus. And we had talked prior, before recording, about just the chronic pain that you experience. And so I'm curious if how you had learned to cope and to not talk about emotions, if that affects you in a positive way, in your opinion, of course, in a more of a positive way or a negative way when it comes to the chronic illness that you experience. Um, because I think like that gives like a whole different level of coping when you're dealing with chronic pain all the time. And it's I think, at least for me, sometimes it's almost easier to ignore and to not talk about certain things, but we know it's still there. And so then it almost doesn't make it easier. And so it's kind of like this weird catch 22. But I would love to hear how you feel that that affected how you're currently dealing with your chronic illness, and if you think there's any relation at all.
Oh, definitely. um, when it comes to chronic illness, there's already a stigma with it. So, because especially with certain types of illnesses that you don't see outright, like the lupus, the chronic pain, stuff like that, rheumatoid arthritis, stuff like that. If you don't have an outward appearance of you being sick, there's already a stigma there. And so, yeah, I have learned, it was a thing over the years to not talk about it, you know, oh, just deal with it. Because I was diagnosed at 4, but I had symptoms way before then. I was pretty much sick since the time I was born. And so when it comes to dealing with the pain, my situation is much different than someone who has, you know, got diagnosed later in life. So I haven't had to like change the way I work or change the way I live, literally, because that has been my life. That's all I've known is pain. I've never known life without pain. So my situation is a little bit different than others. But still, I do have problems. Like, for example, people will say things like, oh, it can't be that bad, And even my dad would say the same thing. Oh, it can't be that bad. Even though he has the same stuff going on, it can't be that bad. But that was his mentality too. So he had, the mentality, of being strong, um, and soldiering on. That's another term that came up a lot, was soldiering on, being like a soldier, get through it, stuff like that. And that really has shown me how the military has kind of taken over how we see things, um, about soldiering on, we have to be strong, we can't be weak, stuff like that. And really, I think it should be something that we rework and, look into maybe not doing that as much anymore. Um, I mean, yeah, it gave us a strong generation, but every generation is different too. So, of how they deal with things. So, yeah, because my parents were, 2 generations before me. I was like, I was a whole 2 generations after them. And so it was like their generation was the work hard, the silent generation. They kept everything silent, all their pain, all their struggles and stuff. It was all silent and they worked hard, you know. My generation, I had to learn 2 different ways of doing things. So I had to learn how to like mash together the work hard, work smart, uh, stuff. And then I'm also the generation that started into like learning about mental problems and how to treat them and everything. And it is okay to get diagnosed with certain things, or it's okay to start talking about certain things. So I had to learn how to mash those 2 together. And when that happens, you get very confused. And so for a long time, I was confused about what to keep from my childhood in the terms of how to deal with things and what not to take into adulthood. And now I am in therapy. So that's a whole different change there, because I was kind of raised with the thought of therapy is, they're going to put you in the crazy house type thing. So yeah, that is my take on it. And yeah, it's a whole different life.
No, you're so right when we talk about the generational just kind of soldiering on and work hard and act like everything's okay and just ignore it. It's interesting. I had a conversation with my mom a few weeks back about generational trauma, and how different things can be passed on from generation to generation. And when you look back in the 60s, the 50s, and even stretching further long before that, and you look at the way life was, just snippets of how life was, it makes sense why that group raised the next group the way they raised them. And then it makes even more sense why that group raised the next generation a certain way. And you can really connect the dots between this almost like survival mentality, is what I like to call it, that a lot of the older generations had. And then it's a whole different dynamic when you start talking about the women's mentality versus the men's mentality, and like what specifically they went through. And um, for me, that's been very healing, when it comes to a lot of childhood stuff, um, that I dealt with, because I had a little bit more of an understanding of, okay, well, my parents were this way because this is how their parents were, and we only know what we know. And prior to that, their parents were this way, and maybe there was like a little bit of a survival mindset going on that has been passed on from generation to generation. And we could go down a whole rabbit hole of this, and talking about how generational trauma gets passed on. But for you, for example, you had a parent who was quite literally living in survival mode, um, from a very traumatic war experience. And then, on the flip side, his wife also had her own traumas. And I'm sure a time period when she grew up where women couldn't really speak up for themselves the way that they wanted to. And so, I think a lot of that stuff's been passed on till today, especially in the military. And because we still have this mentality in a lot of places of just deal with it, just suck it up, it's okay, it's not that bad, the mission has to be completed, that's more important. And I think we're very, very slowly coming out of that. But I think literally as a society as a whole, when it comes to these illnesses that you can't see, whether it be mental or some kind of chronic pain or chronic illness, the stigma exists because people can't relate. And if you can't relate to what someone's dealing with, we're only comparing based off of our own past experiences. So if my idea of a lot of pain is, oh, you have a look of pain on your face or you're not in pain, maybe I look at someone a little bit differently compared to someone who, like you, has chronic pain, and you can understand that you could be in a lot of pain and look like you're completely okay. Same goes for anxiety. Like I had high functioning anxiety the entire time I was in the Navy, but you didn't know I had anxiety because I wasn't walking around falling apart all the time. I did that on my own time. And so I was literally told one time when I went into mental health, they were like, hey, if you don't look like you're falling apart, they're not going to want to give you medication to help with your anxiety. And so it's interesting when we talk about this topic specifically because I think it just brings up that point of you never know what someone's going through. So be kind to everyone and don't assume that someone's okay just because you think they look okay. Um, yeah. So I kind of went off on a little bit of a rant there, but you brought up some really important topics that I really wanted to touch on. So I wanted to ask you, Jacqueline, did you feel like you were supported? Because you said that you've literally had pain your entire life, but you're also raised by people who maybe didn't feel that your pain was to the level that you felt it was at. And I can't imagine being a child and going through all this. And maybe not quite knowing how to articulate it in the way that you needed to. I'm not sure. I'll have you touch on that so you can tell us how you actually felt. But did you feel like you were supported? And if not, at what point did you feel like you really had that support?
Okay, so my situation is way like different than other people. So I was raised in a family who had chronic illnesses. So they understood. My mom has diabetes. She also is, I can't remember now. I think it's like 3 or 4 time cancer survivor. And she's had multiple medical, health problems and stuff. And then my birth mother, she had lupus herself. So that is my parents' daughter, my birth mother. So it's very confusing. But anyway, so she had lupus when she was young as well. So my parents knew how to take care of children with chronic illnesses, take care of people with chronic illnesses. And so they never questioned much. So when I said that I was hurting or if I didn't feel good, they took it as is. Unless it was on Sunday. I still had to go to church. But that was the one, thing that they were not fine with. But my thing is getting out into society. When I grew up and I moved out of the house and I had to do things on my own and everything like that, I started to see the stigma and the less support. Because so I grew up in a very small town. I grew up in a little lake area, only 22,000 people. And so everyone knows everyone pretty much. And my parents, so I grew up with my parents knowing about the illness. all of my church family knew about my problems, so they were supportive. I myself was homeschooled, so I never was in public school. I was homeschooled K through 12. And so I did not have to worry about going into like a public place much. Stuff like that. And it wasn't a constant. If I did go to into public areas, it wasn't a constant thing. It was just a, once in a while thing. And so I was always home. I was very secluded. I was very, very secluded. And so now as I'm an adult, I'm seeing how bad society is towards mental illness, towards invisible illnesses and stuff, because I don't see the support anymore. And it's hard to, unlike other people who find it hard to find support from their families, I'm finding it hard to find support in my own community, So for example, I'll say, oh, I'm hurting today or whatever. And I have people come up to me and say, oh yes, I totally understand. And my shoulder hurts. Like I have shoulder problems and stuff. And I'm thinking, no, that's not what I'm talking about, because and also I have to remind myself that my pain is totally different than other people's. It's not the same, because and my parents understood that, because they had the same problems. People in church had the same problems sometimes. And so they totally understood. It's a mountain community, and they had a lot of health problems up there too. So it was like, it was different. It was a different world. And so it was a different culture. And so for me, when I get out into society and, try to relate to people and everything, I have a lot of problems. So like for me, I am at a constant 3 to 4 pain level. It's never it's never been below a 3. And I don't take any painkillers. I've done, your regular over the counter, but those stopped working years ago. And I really do not want to be on any narcotics or anything like that. So I'm just on anti-inflammatory meds, and that's it. It helps, but it doesn't do much. It just takes that edge off. And so we're talking about, with me, I have SLE, which is systemic lupus. And so that's a full body problem. It's not, there's different types of lupus, and some of those types hit certain areas of the body. Mine is a full body experience. So for me, when it comes to like pain and stuff, there are many different types of pain for me. I am at a constant 3 to 4, but I can also have migraines. I can have, sores, mouth sores, nose sores, skin sores, you name it, I can have it, And so those are different types of pain. So my base level is 3, but I can reach up to an 8 or even a 10 sometimes. But I'm smiling still. I don't show it. Like I'm not crying, I'm not screaming, but that's because also my pain tolerance is higher. That's what other people need to know. What people need to understand is that there are different types of pain tolerance. There's low pain tolerance, normal pain tolerance, I guess you could say, and then high pain tolerance. High pain tolerance is caused by long-term pain, pretty much. So, for example, since I've learned to deal with it over time, my pain level has risen. My pain level is probably 2 times what a normal person's pain level is. So my constant 3 might be someone's 10. My 8 is probably someone's 20. And so that's why one of the things that I would love to do is try to get rid of the pain scale at the doctors because that doesn't work for many people. So yeah, it's a whole different world.
So I wanted to ask, for people from the outside looking in, so people who don't have chronic illness, maybe they don't quite know how to address or interact with or deal with people that do have chronic illness on either a day-to-day basis or on a bad day. And so I'm talking about just like regular interactions, but also workplace interactions. Because I know that several people that I know in my life, whether in the military or civilian, they have some kind of invisible illness, whether that be some kind of chronic pain somewhere in their body or mental illness. And the people around them don't know how to handle it. And so you get a lot of the, oh, just suck it up. Oh, do you have to go to the doctor right now? Like, can your appointment wait? Um, and I think when you hear that so many times, you start to like really question yourself. I know, like for me, getting questioned by doctors and getting questioned by the people that I worked around about what I was dealing with caused me to almost automatically question myself, like, are you really hurting? Is it really that bad? Like, are you really that depressed? And I started to like have these internal um, conflict dialogues where I was almost justifying like why I didn't need to go get help. And so my question for you out of this is, how can people support someone who has some kind of chronic illness without making it awkward, but also like giving them whatever resources or time or space that someone like you would need in say a workplace or even just like a regular interaction.
Oh, definitely. This is where you thought that you went off on a little tangent. um, so for me, uh, yeah, this is where I would love to like just change the world because, so what I would suggest, I mean, it's a suggestion because I know that there are people out there that have their own way of doing things, stuff like that. So these are all just suggestions. So what I would do is, for one, don't automatically go to advice when they say, "Oh, I'm having this problem." Don't ever do that. Just listen to them. Just listen to them. And if you want to give advice, ask them first before giving advice, especially when it comes to like mental illness type stuff, because some of the advice you can give, it's unwanted. So like saying you need to find a therapist might not be something that person needs to hear. They just need to be listened to. They need someone that they know to listen to them, So be it a friend or something. They don't need someone else to come to them and say, I think you need to go to therapy. A therapist would better suit you than just me listening to you. But people need to know that listening can help so much. Just listening to someone can help so much. Actually, I can tell you from experience that I needed some help with something. I went to a friend and I was telling her all about it. She did not say one thing to me. She just listened. And I literally helped myself just by talking to her. I'm like, oh, that's the solution. So I just needed to talk it out and have someone there just talk it out to. And you don't even have to say anything. You just have to listen to them. And that is the most powerful thing that someone can do. Because when it comes to advice, like I said, it can be unwanted or it can also be harmful, because sometimes you don't understand what that person's going through, and you might suggest to do something that will make it worse, you know? So listening is a must. Another thing I would suggest doing is when you know someone has a problem, a specific problem, like for example, for me, SLE, or someone else, PTSD or diabetes or whatever. What I suggest, especially workplace wise, like for bosses and all this stuff, or like leaders type, I would suggest going and researching about it. Make sure you understand, so you understand what they go through at the most. You might not understand physical wise, but you will understand, like, oh, they have to go to the doctor like every 3 weeks, or they have to go and see a therapist every other week or whatever. And also, not only that, but it also brings up topics that you can learn more. You can ask them more about it. And that's another thing, is ask questions. Don't just when someone comes into your office, a new worker comes into your office and and they say, oh, I have this. Don't just think they're like everyone else. And also, don't think that because you might have multiple people with the same problem in your office, don't think that they're all the same. Everyone is different. So from one person, I was diagnosed with ADHD. I know people who have ADHD who are on medication. I'm not. I'm going a whole different way. Or, also kind of like with diabetes, there's 2 types of diabetes. Don't eat. One is different than the other. So you have to be very careful. And so when it comes to that, I say, do your research, ask questions, get to know the person. Don't just work with them, but get to know them. Because once you do that, you will understand where they're coming from. You will understand more. Lastly, please don't try to, unless you yourself have the problem that they specifically have, don't go and say you understand, because you don't. That is one thing that really, really gets on people who have chronic pain, chronic illnesses and stuff. That's what gets on our nerves, is people saying, oh, I understand, and then go on to say why they understand it. like they say, oh yeah, I have a shoulder problem and I'm going to get my shoulder fixed. But the thing is that for us chronic illness people, we can't get it fixed. It's a constant thing. There is no fixing it. And so we don't have that that whole thing about fixing it. We don't have that on our side. We have to live with it. And so unless you really truly understand chronic pain, chronic illness, all that chronic and mental illness, don't say you understand. Just say instead of saying, oh, I understand, say, how can I help you? Because that is what will bring you more closer to the person, get you more into their way of life as well. And you can then see how different life can be for that person as well.
Yeah, you bring up something that's been such a reoccurring theme on this podcast, about having a genuine interest in the people around you and getting to know people on a humanistic level. There's so much power in this, and it's such a simple thing, but you took it a step further in doing your research. And I love that because not everyone obviously wants you to do that. Some people are okay with just like, hey, listen, I'm going through something. That's all you need to know. And that's okay. Like if someone does not want you to pry, please do not pry. Every person's so different, but some people are literally begging for someone to take a genuine interest in what they're going through so that they don't feel alone. And especially when we're talking about our active duty military communities, these people that are sometimes 18, 19 years old, away from their family, they have no one, and maybe something comes up for them, chronic pain, some kind of chronic illness. Maybe it's not chronic. Maybe it's something that is acute. Maybe they broke a bone, but it's a long healing process. It doesn't matter what it is. I think that as leaders, we should be taking a genuine interest in the people that are our subordinates, and even the people above us. I truly believe that it doesn't matter what position you hold. You're always learning from the people around you, and learning could be, hey, maybe today I took a second to learn a little bit more about PTSD because while this person doesn't want to talk about it with me, now I understand a little bit more about what PTSD is for the next person that comes along and has it. Or maybe if this person's ready to open up in the future about PTSD, I understand a little bit more. And you bring up that point about not saying the words I understand, but how can I help you? How can I support you? I think those words are so incredibly powerful. And those tips that you shared are absolute gold for all my leaders that are listening, because I think we have this kind of void, for lack of a better term, in the military where leaders don't know how to talk to people that are dealing with things that they don't understand. And so, learning to understand, seeking to understand by asking questions, talking, researching, but also just asking that simple question of how can I help you? Because it's going to be different for everyone. Um, Thank you for sharing those. Those were so helpful, like you don't even know. Um, Jacquelin, I'd love to just kind of wrap this up by talking a little bit more about what you do, um, currently with your writing and your editing, just so people know. I always like to share value at the end of my episodes because you never know who's listening and who might want to utilize your services. And so this is your spotlight moment. Just share a little bit more with us about what you do.
All right. So I actually own my own editing business. It's called Mountain Girl Editing and Coaching. And what I do is I help people one-on-one. So it's not like these other companies that bring editors into a team, where you have an editing team. I myself will do basically everything, I guess you could say. I dabble in everything. I love learning. So if there's something that I don't know, I will research it. I will learn it, and I will do it. I want to be able to help people get their stories out. I want to help people, like, especially like people who are military. If there's anyone who is military who wants help, doing a memoir of their military life or whatever, I'm always up for that. And I do both editing, and I also do coaching. So I coach you through the writing process if you need help with it, or I can edit it after the fact. But I also have a thing where I can help you by writing it myself. Well, basically it would be like, you would send me like a voice message or something about what you want, and I would write it. So I would transcribe it or something to that effect. I'm always up for that type of stuff. I help with social media. I help with emails, newsletters, the whole 9 yards. So I don't work with just book writers. I work with entrepreneurs, content creators, that type of stuff.
Where can people find you if they want to work with you?
They can find me on Instagram. So I have my Instagram. I also am on Facebook. I do have a Facebook page for my business, but I am hopefully soon getting a website up and running. So my website, I guess you could use it, but it's called mgediting.com. I don't know when the stuff will be up, but it should be soon. And yeah.
Awesome. Well, I will make sure to post the list of everything you do, along with where people can find you in this episode description if anyone wants to reach out. Jacquelin, thank you so much for your time and sharing a snippet of your life and a snippet of your world with us. And I have so much gratitude for you, and thank you.
You're welcome. I am so honored to do this.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen in today. Each week, I'll be bringing you value in the mental health space and its direct impact on service members and veterans. If you feel you personally got value today from this episode, it would mean the world to me if you would leave a 5-star rating and review and share this to your audience. Until next time, remember, your story matters, your mental health matters, and your story doesn't end here.